So could you explain to me how you define environmental justice?
Environmental justice embraces the principle that all communities and all people are entitled to equal protection of our environmental laws, housing laws, transportation laws, health laws, and civil rights laws. And so it says that no community, just because it's poor or physically located on the wrong side of the track, should be somehow bombarded with things that other people don't want or have resources to escape, such as contamination and pollution. And when you involve race as a component in this, in terms of institutional racism, you get this whole pattern of compounding the problem of poor people and people of color. When you get that, you get this double whammy. And environmental racism is no different than other forms of racism, such as discrimination in housing, employment, education, voting, etc. So if we have discrimination based on race in those areas, why should it be so hard for some people to understand that race and racism also operate when it comes to environmental protection?
And race is, as you cited, still one of the most potent factors when predicting where a toxic waste facility will be located, more important than income or socioeconomic factors. Why does this persist, and why is this the case?
Well, if you look at the 1987 Toxic Waste and Race Report, which basically documented that fact that race was the most important factor for predicting where these hazardous waste facilities are located. And as you said, not income, not property values, and not whether or not you own or rent your home. Race is still very prevalent in our society, and oftentimes race determines whether or not a community gets a shopping center, sidewalks, paved streets, lighting, grocery stores, etc. And so when we talk about land use and facility siting and looking at residential segregation, it's very predictable who gets what, when, and why. And so when you look at everything being equal, even when you control for income, you would expect to have an equal number of randomly distributed facilities, but that's not the case. Race trumps class, and income is a major part of determining one's class.
When we look at this idea of race being one of the strongest determining factors, of course, one of the ways to help correct this problem is through legislation. And you helped Bill Clinton's administration write an executive order that required all federal agencies to consider environmental justice in their programs. Do you think that legislation is the most important leverage point for change?
I think it's important that we do have legislation, and we have built into our laws and regulations equal protection. And having the laws and regulations, it's not enough. We've seen that. We've had almost 40 years of civil rights laws and environmental laws. The problem is that we have the best laws in the world. They're just not enforced equally across the board. Mm-hmm. And so what we need is basically to enforce the laws that does not discriminate and does not provide preferential treatment just because you have lawyers, resources, and scientists on your side. And if you are poor or you don't have resources, you get dumped on. And what we found in the 2007 Toxic Waste and Race at 20 report, race is still the most potent factor for determining where these facilities are located. But we also found that the problem has worsened over the years. Even when we've had more and more laws, the laws are not enforced. What it says is that the environmental protection apparatus is broken when it comes to some communities. And the end result is that it's showing up in terms of health effects, and it's showing up in terms of people getting sick. It's showing up in terms of people's neighborhoods being saturated with locally unwanted land uses, or LULUs, as some people call them. And that is not the American way. And I think that all communities have a right to basically be free from pollution and not being targeted for things that other people don't want or can escape just because they have money and resources.
When you talk about rights, really, what this series is trying to emphasize is that environmental rights are civil rights. and that everyone does not have equal access to clean air and healthy food and safe water. I wonder if you can tell me, you're someone who was really, as you say, drafted into this movement, and you didn't come from a political background. How did you come to be such an important player in this whole environmental justice movement?
Well, I was just, way back in 1978, I was a college professor in Houston and just 2 years out of graduate school, and I was asked to collect data for a lawsuit that my wife had filed trying to stop this sanitary landfill. And we know there is nothing sanitary about a landfill. Mm-hmm. And this landfill was being sited in a predominantly African-American middle-class suburban neighborhood. It was not a poverty pocket. It was, 85% of the people owned their homes. And so I basically was asked to collect data for this lawsuit. I collected the data and did a study in 1979 and published a number of articles and books. And so the idea of seeing this community basically as the dumping grounds for garbage when there was nothing out there except houses, trees, and just a pristine area. But the fact is that it was black, and that was the determining factor as to why that particular area was selected. And over the last 25, 30 years, I've been working on this issue, and we developed a methodology for pinpointing where waste facilities are located and overlaying race and class and other kinds of factors. And at that time, there was no GIS mapping, there was no solid waste or toxic release inventory database or anything. We had to do it by hand and manually and color maps by hand with pens, sticking pins in maps, and et cetera. We've gotten more sophisticated. We've come a long ways, but the problem, as I said before, has worsened over the years because of still this callous concern for some communities, and it's as if some communities are not created equal. There are some that are more equal than others, and if a community happens to be located physically on the wrong side of the track, it gets less protection, and it gets things that other people don't want. And so that's how I got involved, and I've been involved over the last 30 years. And we, way back then it was just myself and a couple other people. Today there's an army of young people and scientists and toxicologists and hydrologists and lawyers working on environmental justice issues. But we still need more and more emphasis on getting laws changed and getting the rules and regulations enforced without regard to the income of the population or the race or ethnicity of the residents who live in those areas that have been targeted.
So what can an average citizen do to help forward this movement?
I think it's important that people do understand that one person can make a difference. Having an organization helps. And having the information also helps. Getting the information and getting it in a timely manner and proceeding to challenge those powers that be that would turn some communities into the dumping grounds. What we've seen over the years is that the environmental justice movement is a bottom-up movement. You have grassroots leaders and in many cases, and in most cases, women of color who have taught themselves and basically learned how to read those impact statements and how to read those books and maps and charts, very technical stuff, on-the-job training, and have basically positioned themselves so that they can stand toe-to-toe and can challenge those decisions that are oftentimes unfair, unjust, and in some cases illegal. That's what this movement has been able to grow and mature and I think thrive because of the fact that it is a grassroots community-based movement that is broad enough and has a diverse tent to get all kinds of people, from college professors to lay community activists involved, and hopefully it will make us a better nation and a more secure nation and hopefully a healthy one.
So what you're effectively saying is that it doesn't matter, where you're from, what your income or education level is, but everyone can really take part in grassroots organization and help ensure more equitable distribution of resources and a more safer community for everyone.
That's exactly what I'm saying. And what I'm saying is that in the long run, it makes much more sense, and economically and morally, it's the right thing to do. That we have to all say that there's one. I mean, there is no Hispanic air, there's no black air, and there's no white air. There's air that we all breathe, and that we have to understand that we have to work together and solve this environmental problem from toxics to climate. And that's all I can say. And it's not a debate. There's no debate whether or not we should be breathing clean air. That's an imperative that we have to fight for and struggle to achieve.
Why do you think women of color are so active in this?
I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that women in our society still, right or wrong, are basically the child rearers. They are the ones who are in communities and for the most part attending the PTAs and the school meetings and the parks and the playgrounds. The little old grandmothers are still, keeping kids. And so when you talk about getting involved and getting active, family, home, neighborhood, community, and the fact that I think when you look at the passion behind the work that's on the ground and in this movement, there's no doubt. At least 75% of the leaders, grassroots leaders on the ground who are carrying this water for this movement are women. And I can't explain it other than the fact that, all the meetings that I've attended and all the groups that I've worked with, and if you look at the most dedicated and hardworking, and that doesn't mean that men are not involved or not concerned, whatever, but it's almost like our church, the black church, for example. Women are still the backbone of the church, even though you may have the minister who's a male. If you look at the environmental justice movement and many of our organizations, environmental justice organizations, they are led by women, small organizations, oftentimes volunteer staff. They don't have boards of directors or paid staffs or it's all volunteers for the most part. There are some organizations that have staffs and boards, etc. But for the most part, the vast majority are basically community leaders that have been drafted, pressed into duty, and they see this as one way to make sure that their family, home, and community survives. And that's a lot of pressure and a lot of responsibility to place on any person. And that's why we're saying that we got to have more and more young people involved, growing this movement, sharing the leadership, so that we can basically have a much stronger movement and share the load. Women have been, for the most part, have been carrying more than their fair share of the load for this movement, and doing a great job, I should say. But I do think it's time for more and more men to step up and help and assist.
I also think the fact that we, women of color, face discrimination in terms of race and ethnicity as well as gender plays a role.
Yeah, it's a double whammy. It's a double whammy.
Exactly.
And then when you look at the fact that in many cases, when you talk about having the awareness and attending meetings and who has the information early on and who has, again, it's not unusual. If you look at the civil rights movement, and men were out front, but if you look at who's in those offices and who the grunt work, getting the information out, the phone banks and the mail outs and alerts and et cetera, and now you have that type of model now being pushed forward, and now you have more and more women in visible leadership positions and being recognized for their leadership by getting awards, like Peggy Shepard getting the Heinz Prize for environment, or Marjorie Richards getting the Goldman Prize for environment. And so those kinds of, when Gary Mathai won a Nobel Prize, those kinds of things, I think, it's not by accident that these individuals who won these very prestigious awards are women, and women of color. So that's I think even the movement itself, the environmental justice movement and the environmental movement, are basically still has to deal with paternalism and sexism and racism, and so I think women are breaking through, and I think because of the fact